Cool. Awesome. So my name is Niklas Kunkel. I'm the founder of Chronicle. 10-second blurb about me. I was part of the founding team of MakerDAO. We developed cool stuff like DAI. We made the first oracles on Ethereum. We made the first DEX on Ethereum. We did the first Solidity debugger. So a lot of cool stuff. I would like to also think that we were one of the forefathers of DeFi that kind of created DeFi into what it is today. And so given all that, I kind of want to get a sense for who are you guys? What do you all do? Are you builders? Are you researchers? Are you investors? Are you hobbyists? Are you a student? You know, let's. I don't know. I'm gonna pick on you. I would not.
We did some collaboration on Maker, on DAI, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We used some of our tools on that and developed some of our tools with MakerDAO. So yeah, pretty nice.
I saw the runtime verification shirts, and maybe I shouldn't have picked on you. Probably should have picked on someone else. Yeah, sure. I don't need to hear everyone. Just to get an idea.
Okay, I'm Eric, and I work at RISC Zero. I'm an engineer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Gregory. I'm from runtime verification also.
Oh man, there's dozens.
We worked with MakerDAO before.
Are you guys recruiting here? Are you hiring?
I'm Kyle. I'm the DevRel for Phoenix.
Okay.
Cool.
I'm Yehor. I'm a SecRel or DevRel in the Pessimistic. We provided the EVM and non-EVM audits.
Okay. So a lot of DevRels representing. Good. We need more of you. There's not enough of y'all in the space. We actually just went through a 6-month journey of hiring a DevRel lead. It was a challenging process that tested my patience.
I'm Mona from Automata. I'm also an engineer.
What kind of engineer? Sorry?
Backend engineer.
Backend engineer. Got it.
Hi, my name is Marek, and I'm the software engineer, and my focus is primarily about the backend.
Cool.
Hey, I'm Rami. I'm also an engineer at RISC Zero.
Hey, I'm Peter. I'm an engineer at vLayer with Leo.
I'm Leo. I'm a ZK engineer at vLayer, also ex-MakerDAO.
Cool. Okay, so we have a big diversity of people here, but it sounds, but for crypto, right? But it sounds like everyone's fairly technically grounded, and it sounds like people really know their stuff, they're deep in the space, which is good because it means I can be more technical and I can give more kind of complex examples without dumbing them down too much. We've all seen DeFi either from afar or up close and personal, degenning in the trenches. And so DeFi, right, has had that remarkable kind of product market fit spike that got kind of the initial traction in one cycle, but then didn't really dissipate, right, in later cycles, right? DeFi kind of just kept pace, and rather than just being this one-off, one-time trend, it kind of continued to snowball and snowball. However, as genius as we all are at coming up with mechanisms and incentives and these feedback loops to grow DeFi, I think really what we've managed to do is come up with incredibly hyper reflexive systems, such that when number goes up, right, we have this great feedback loop of okay, number go up means people want leverage, right? More demand for leverage, right, makes yield go up, right? And yield going up makes people want to, lend, and that boosts like the TVL of DeFi, right? Or even like the people that want to borrow, right? They have to like lock up collateral, and that boosts the TVL of DeFi. Even the fact that we talk about TVL, right? Why is TVL the metric that we use to like on DeFi Llama, right? To like rank protocols and like, where their place is on that ranking. If you have, right, there's this idea that we have, right, that more TVL, bigger is better, right? And so if we're going to, we're all cultural relativists here, right? There's no judgment, right? But if we're going to acknowledge that that's how we're going to rank and design our systems in a way that have that positive feedback loop, we also have to acknowledge that the reverse is also true. So when number goes down, right, the demand for leverage disappears, right? High yields disappear, right? You could even experience negative yields. The incentive for someone to lock their assets up in a protocol disappears, right? The lending rates aren't high enough, or I don't want to borrow because borrowing is giving me long exposure. So in a bear market, right, we see the entire like kind of bubble just like deflate. And so this is a problem, right? And so you may like, for example, like have, some token bags, right? And your tokens go really, really high and you're all giddy, right? Like, oh my God, I'm a genius, right? And then the token crashes and you're like, oh, I was so stupid, right? Neither of those two statements are true, right? But it's not just from the investor perspective that this like boom bust thing is like a really undesirable property. It's also a really undesirable property from the perspective of organizations. And so I want to kind of use, given y'all's like likely familiarity with Maker, I want to kind of use Maker as like a case study here to kind of show like, what were the symptoms, right, of this like boom bust problem. And I think they don't just apply to Maker. I think they apply to probably most DeFi organizations. Certainly, I think, you runtime verification guys, you guys probably also get like second order effects of this like boom bust cycle, right? Where a lot of people want audits like in the bull market, and then in the bear market, maybe less people want audits. Yeah. So from an organizational perspective, right? What do you do in the bull market, right? Well, you're making lots of money. You're getting lots of new users, right? You're potentially fundraising a big amount of money, right? And okay, it's time to professionalize, right? It means, hiring a bigger team. It means, filling people to be the head of certain functions where, that used to be like one person's role was like doing like 5 different things, right? It's starting new business lines, new products, new projects, right? So this very like growth-oriented mindset, right? And it requires like, hiring a bunch of people, making those capital investments, right? Taking that time. And then the bear market comes around, right? And the project gets canceled, right? We have to let like people go because we're going through the burn, like our runway is disappearing too quickly, right? And so it's not that it's like fun for an organization to fire people, right? It's a it's almost like a biological like reflex, right? But it's not healthy for morale, right? It sucks when you have like domain experts, that are like understand your product, like the real guts of your product really well, and you can't afford to keep them, right? Maybe everyone's salary got pushed super high, like during the, you were trying to hold on to people and you had to give everybody raises, and now the bear market comes around and you couldn't even afford to keep the people that you had before the bull market even happened, right? So these are like, some of those examples are quite contrived, but all of your organizations are affected by this like boom bust like reality, and it has like very negative consequences, not just on the business but on people. And so solving this problem is like a highly desirable property. And so at Maker, right, it was, well, how can we like, the way that we thought about this was like, how can we like diversify the revenue into like uncorrelated, or at least not directly correlated ways, such that, you know, when we have these bad times, right, we don't, you know, we have a dampened version of this like highly reflexive like system. So let's kind of take a look at like revenue. I don't think the absolute numbers really matter as much here. Like, don't get me wrong, Maker makes a ton of money. But I think it's more like the ratio of like where crypto, like what is crypto income versus like what is like non-crypto income. So everything you see in this table is all like crypto derived revenue. And it's mostly just like vaults for lending, right? For wrap BTC, for staked ETH, and for ETH, right? And the reason that there's multiple vaults for certain things, right, is that you know, some of those will have a higher collateralization ratio requirement, and therefore will have like a lower interest rate, right? Versus like if you had a lower like collateralization ratio, right, you are more risky, right, then we charge you a higher interest rate. There's also the liquidity, the DAI liquidity that Maker is feeding into Spark Protocol, right, which is a fork of Aave that Maker launched early or late last year. Yeah, late last year. Right, Maker seeds liquidity into Spark, right, at a certain rate, right, and so it's profiting off of that too, but that's still crypto derived income, right, because demand for DAI on Spark is still, you know, reflexive with demand for lending DAI. So let's take a look at the real world asset side. And so this one's probably going to look a little bit more archaic to you because a lot of these are just names and not necessarily descriptions like they are on the vault side. It's not super important that we go through like each one of these, but I will make a few comments that like the, you know, like as with anything, like we went through like iterations of like experimenting, right? Seeing what worked, what didn't, starting small, right? The first one took us forever to do, right? Doing the legal stuff around this is difficult when it had never been done before and you were kind of just like making it up as you went along. So yeah, experimenting with different legal structures, different jurisdictions, different types of like investment exposure. I think the big one that really hit was, you know, T-bills, right? Monetary policy was very accommodating in that respect, right? But the answer to solving your revenue troubles is not just buy T-bills, right? And calling it a day, because, you know, T-bill yields aren't going to be high forever, right? There's certainly one way to diversify your revenue, but you haven't solved the problem completely. You've just kind of narrowed it slightly, right? There is a world where crypto is down and T-bill yields are lower, right? Coinbase custody is literally just, you know, lending, you know, money to Coinbase and letting them custody it, right? If you're a Coinbase customer, right, I think you can stake your USDC on there, right, and earn like 4 or 5% or something like this. This is something similar, but more on an institutional level. Huntington Valley Bank, HV Bank, I think is an interesting one. HV Bank is a US bank. It's not massive. It's not a JP Morgan or even like a top 20 bank. It's a smaller regional bank. And, you know, what does a smaller regional bank do? What, like, primarily, it has people deposit their paychecks, and it extends loans mostly for mortgages, right? And so what does a small regional bank need? Well, it needs capital. And why does it need that capital? So it can originate more mortgages and be more profitable, right? So essentially what we do here, right, is Maker gives a credit line to this bank, in this case 100 million, and the bank can use that credit line to originate US housing loans, which is really cool, right? Because it's like an example of like DeFi actually having like real world impacts. Like you could have taken out a loan to buy a home, and that loan, like unbeknownst to you, could have actually been financed through a DeFi protocol like Maker, right? And the person that, or people that took out these loans, you know, have no idea that they're even using crypto, which is kind of like the best part, right? It means that, you know, that the adoption rate of crypto is not just like constricted by this like, you know, crazy UX problem in private keys, right? Like we can find ways on the back end, right, to put in crypto rails, right, and just and have like this crazy good scaling without having to teach people all about crypto. So I want to kind of move along here, but essentially here, right, the important figure is, right, that in total we're making like 82 million, right, and on the crypto side we are making like 155. So I think you can kind of see this like what kind of like ratio like we have going here, right? So I think this graph is quite cool. So what you see here in blue is all of Maker's revenue dating from like January 2020, because I believe we launched in December of 2019, or at least the new version. And so, right, boom bust, right? Peak, right? Trough. Peak, trough, right? That's this one's right, 2021. That was so here we had DeFi summer, right? This was like the main bull run. Back to the bear here, and this is when we're like, we can't do this anymore, right? We can't keep going from like we're making $200 million to like we're making $10 million, right? So here, right, this red, so the red and yellow both are representative of RWAs. The yellow is just labeled public credit versus the red is private credit. Public credit is, you know, government bonds like T-bills, for instance. So you can see we started off with private credit because it was actually easier to find those opportunities. Or more appropriately, people who can't get traditional financing are very incentivized to go to a crypto protocol when a crypto protocol says who needs loans. Versus like, but you see that when we started, you know, okay, very, you know, small amount of revenue actually coming from the RWA side. But it wasn't until we really went hard on the treasury bills, right, that we started getting like a really healthy amount of the revenue coming from there. So this is not like some magical little wave your wand and just, you know, skip, you know, go in a circle 3 times to say RWA and then all your problems are solved, right? There's like a big problem here in the sense that RWAs are not crypto native. And I know that like, you're just like looking at me like, yeah, duh, right? But that has like really important implications. Because when you integrate a crypto token into your protocol, right, you have some expectations of behavior. You have some expectations of context, right? So the way that I think of blockchains and like Oracle's roles in them is that if you are a application on a blockchain, you have like complete omnipotence on everything on that blockchain, but no visibility of anything outside, right? And that's this like problem that Oracle's kind of solved, right? Because it allows blockchain applications to have this like purview of things happening outside of their kind of domain. And this is especially applicable to RWAs because of these like non-native properties that they exhibit. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list, and it's not meant to be that, right? But I do kind of want to like run through like a few of these. They're going to be very like, what you're going to find is that real world assets can be like very bespoke and require like very, very different types of things you need to look out for and require very different kinds of data. So it really requires you to like think quite like holistically. I think the most obvious one to people, because it intuitively makes sense and because we've probably all seen it before for years now, is custody, right? So I think Chainlink kind of started this product a long time ago called like proof of reserve, right? This idea that, right, if you are for example, if you're like a stable coin, right, you're USDC. Why do we, trust that USDC is $1, right? Because we can like redeem it for $1, like, but what is actually underlying there? Do they actually have like all the money that they say they do, right? Well, they publish, right, their audited, financials, right, once a quarter. Okay, but like, what about in between Q1 and Q2, right? What happens in between there? What if you're Tether, right? You publish something like that you call an audit, but then every auditor says, does not comply within the boundaries of, how you would define what an audit is, right? So I think as an industry, we've been dealing with this issue of like proving custody for like quite some time, right? So, and I think this is actually like the easiest one to solve, right? Okay, you hook up directly to the custodian, right, and you grab the data yourself to prove that this, dummy representation token on chain, right, is actually, synced up with, or that this claim of what exists, this on-chain claim of what exists off-chain, right, actually has the off-chain component backing it. Okay, so that one's kind of obvious. What about things like yield management, or even like credit delegation management? So let's say when you're doing when you're yield farming with your DAI or with your USDC or through your YUSD on Yearn, right? You can actually calculate, right, what your yield is on chain. You can see precisely how much yield you're getting. With off-chain RWA assets, right, you don't have that characteristic built into the token, and the application has no way of like obtaining that data, right? So if you want your application to be smart, like what can it do, right, if it knows about like the yield of an RWA? Well, let's say you're a maker and you've delegated like $1 billion into various RWA opportunities, right? RWA A is yielding 3%, and B is yielding 4%, and C is yielding 5.5%. Well, wouldn't you rebalance and reallocate less from the 3% bucket and put more towards, the 5-6% bucket, right? Same can be said, for say you need to do some kind of liquidity management. So in Maker's case, right, the peg is held together by a module called the PSM, the peg stability module. And all this thing is just like a one-to-one swap facility between a stable coin like USDC and DAI. So if you give it one USDC, it will give you one DAI. If you give it one DAI, it will give you one USDC. Now, that all works great to make sure DAI is, exactly $1, except what happens when you start running low on USDC, right? What happens when a lot of people come to give it one DAI, and then the thing is like, I have no USDC left to give. Well, at that point, the peg breaks. So maintaining this liquidity buffer of USDC in that facility is extremely important for Maker, right, and for the DAI peg. Right now, right, that process can be incredibly manual, right, in the sense that, you have like a team of analysts, right, looking at all of the paperwork and all of the counterparties and the reporting to identify, okay, this one's yielding this much, and this one's yielding that much, and this one's yielding that much. And, in the case of bonds, for instance, right, the bonds mature at like a certain date, right? And if you want to sell your bond, before it's matured, right, you're very likely to have to sell it at a discount. And the discount kind of being the, based on, how close or far away to maturity are you, right? So when it comes time for, to sell some RWAs to replenish this buffer of USDC in this, swap facility, right, where the supply of USDC in there is very important, it's like, which RWA are you going to sell, right? Great, and then, okay, so the analysts go and they find all this information. Okay, we're going to do this one is, is the one expiring in June, and this one's expiring in September. Okay, so June, let's sell this one, right? Okay, let's do a governance proposal. Okay, great, the governance proposal passes. Now the protocol can finally do this reallocation, right? And in that time, the market may have had even more people try to, grab a USDC out of this buffer, right? Before we even had a chance to refill it. So, like in this case, wouldn't it be better if we just had some kind of oracle reporting what the, maturity of each of the RWA buckets is? If not absolutely, because some of them are like portfolios, then at least like the average maturity date, right, or the weighted average maturity date, then the protocol can just be smart and like automatically choose like the one that's going to be maturing the soonest and going to have the lowest discount to par, so the protocol is going to take like the least losses on selling too early, right? So with a crypto asset, you would never have to, consider all that, right? Like all the data is at your fingertips, and you can just design a smart contract really easily that just checks all the data sources you need and just instantly does all this. Other could be liquidity, right? We're used to crypto assets just having on-chain liquidity, right? So your lending protocol can liquidate a token because there is a pool of liquidity in Uniswap or in Balancer or in Sushi, right? Or in any number of the different DEXs. The RWAs, right? There's a big range, right? Some of these are quite esoteric, like instruments that are not just publicly traded, but even like in private markets are like rarely traded, right? On the opposite end of that range, you have things like treasury bills, which are either one of or the most liquid market in the world, right? Like there's trillions of dollars of T-bill liquidity out there. The problem is your protocol can't go and just liquidate, right, directly. It needs to go through those like TradFi rails. But also your protocol doesn't know what that liquidity profile looks like, and most importantly, if and how that liquidity profile has changed. Because when you talk about the price of something, it's kind of a weird thing to talk about in the absence of liquidity. I think maybe an example that might make that clear is like when you're on CoinMarketCap and you see some weirdo token you've never heard before have like $1 billion market cap, but it only trades like $20,000 a day and there's only like $50,000 of total liquidity, right? Like all of a sudden, like your thinking goes like, oh yeah, this is some bullshit, right? Talking about a price without talking about like liquidity is very much is in a very similar vein to that, right? And so especially when you start talking about these lower liquidity, kind of more exotic financial instruments, having your protocol be aware of like changes to liquidity can be extremely important in like doing prudent like risk management. So I want to kind of start wrapping this up here, but what I want you to get out of this talk is that like if you're not exploring real world assets, like you should be, right? It's not just like a trendy meme. Like there is real stuff happening here and it's solving like very real problems. But it's also not gonna just be like you just do steps 1, 2, and 3 and then you're done, right? There is a lot of work. There is a lot of thinking of edge cases and counterparty risks and a lot of like contracts and legal structures involved, right? It's not the easy path, but I think it's a path that like everyone is going to have to tread down eventually, and I think it's going to be very rewarding. But I want to make sure that people are acknowledging like the responsibility you have to the amount of diligence that you need to do when doing something like this. Because the consequences of not being diligent are severe, right? You know, just like a crypto coin can make your protocol insolvent, you know, so can a real world asset, right? There are real world versions of, you know, hacks, right? There are people who, you know, it's not just a smart contract that can be exploited. A legal contract can be exploited as well, right? But, you know, on the positive side, I think that there are opportunities here as well. And if you let me like chill for a sec, like I think the like role of like oracles is going to change like quite substantially, which I'm really happy about because I get upset that, you know, after like 7 years of doing oracles, the only things that like people think of when they hear oracle is like, oh, the thing that like gives you a price. And I think that as real world assets, you know, start to become more and more integrated into DeFi and honestly will eventually eclipse like the TVL in DeFi, that the role of oracles will change kind of significantly. And we'll go away from just being like this little price messenger to giving you all kinds of data, where they kind of start to become this like interoperability layer for off-chain data to, you know, on-chain. And in particular, right, really connecting this like TradFi and DeFi like layer. Excuse me. So, and if you're looking for one of those, you know, Chronicle's not a bad one. But anyways, if you thought what I talked about today is interesting and you want to learn more, you know, we're deeply involved in the RWA space. It's a big focus for us, and we see a large kind of opportunity there. So you can learn more at our website, on our socials, and at our Discord. Thank you. Cool.
Do you have any questions on RWAs?
Maybe not RWA, but DeFi.
I'd like to know your opinion on some or one in particular. Or one in particular DeFi protocol. Let me know if you want to discuss this off camera. But what do you think of Athena's USDE, right? Since you worked at the maker and you know how you're obviously very knowledgeable about DeFi. A lot of there's been a lot of concerns on the USDE being a little bit risky, I would say, right? But it's been emerging as one of the highest TVL kind of stable coins. So
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think what they're doing is interesting. It certainly generates a lot of yield when number goes up, which makes it like, when we talked about like boom bust, right? It definitely adds reflexivity with the cycle, right? So, excuse me, right? So in a number go up context, which we're in right now, yeah, like Athena is going to generate a ton of yield, and that's going to attract a bunch of users and attract a bunch of like media and partner attention. I don't think that really maintains in a bear market, right? I think you kind of will see the inverse start to happen. And there are some concerns of how orderly that transition can be, right? Where if everyone tries to exit out the door at the same time, right, that there can kind of be severe kind of risk of loss there. I think that they're aware of that, right, and are trying to come up with mechanisms to like regulate that kind of flow a little bit. But from a UX point of view, what that really means is that like when you want out, you can't get out, right? So it may be for the better overall good of the protocol, right? But like, you are giving up some like level of sovereignty there, I would guess, right? Because the mechanisms that they have to implement to regulate that unwinding flow will inevitably lead to blocking you from unwinding. But I don't want to come across like that I think it's like bad or like I'm not like some pastor here preaching that anything not Maker is bad. To give you an example, right? Maker has even allocated some capital into Athena, right? Like we saw those juicy yields, or I say we. They saw those juicy yields and we're like, yeah, I want some of that. Great. So yeah, right? It's all risk management, right? So I wouldn't say it's like good or bad. It's just like another way, an interesting way, surely a very profitable way. But I want to see what it does when number goes down. And there was another stablecoin protocol that worked very, very well when number goes up, and did not work so well once number started going down.
Yeah, we know what you're talking about, obviously. Yeah, understood. Interesting take. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Question?
So my question is, you talked about the different kinds of RWAs and how each one is a little bit different in terms of, for instance, like liquidity. And so when you're trying to, are there examples of like how to integrate this into DeFi? Like, do you encode these policies in a language in a smart contract, or, you're talking about oracles, but like, how are these like sort of like conditional things like implemented or encoded?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you have the on-chain and off-chain components, right? So, you have to have the appropriate legal structures, right, and contracts in place, right? You'll need a custodian, you'll need a broker, you'll probably need some kind of real world representation of the protocol itself, which will probably scare the crap out of every DeFi founder initially, right? Because from a regulatory lightning rod point of view, I think everyone tries to be like the founder of the development team, but not necessarily the protocol itself. But like the way that one way that you could do it, for instance, and Maker has and currently does utilize several, is, for example, there could be like a trust, and the Maker protocol is the ultimate beneficiary of this trust. And Maker could extend a loan to this trust, right? So it mints some DAI. It uses the PSM to convert those DAI into USDC, and the USDC is then redeemed for dollars and sent to the trust bank account. Great. So now you have a trust in the real world, right? It represents Maker, or at least in the sense that Maker is the beneficiary of it. And it needs to listen to instructions from the protocol. In this case, like a encoding of governance proposals that say, when governance says this in a proposal, that maps to the trust doing blah, right? So, hey trust, we want you to go buy 50 million of like the short dated 1-3 year treasuries, and we want you to buy them at a 1,000 a clip or something, right? Or you want to buy them over the course of, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, right? So you don't want them to all mature at the same time, right? You want like this like kind of staggeredness. And so the trustee then goes, right? It recognizes those instructions from the DAO. It has the money. It goes to the broker. It relays those instructions to the broker, right? The broker goes and purchases the bonds in this case, right? Or it could have been anything, could have been some other securities. And then those are sent from the broker to the custodian, right? Who holds them on behalf of the trust, right? So this is a nice like closed loop kind of like example, right? So you have like DAO to trust to broker to custodian. Right, and in reverse, right, hey, governance is like, hey, we want to unwind, right? Trustee says like, hey, broker, I have like all this stuff in custody over here. Can you sell this amount of it or sell all of it, or right, anything in between, right? Sends it over to the broker, they do the sales, send the money to the trust bank account, trust, right? Converts that into USDC, sends it back to the Maker protocol, right? So that's a flow of funds, right, of credit, from Maker back to Maker.
Thank you.
So I have like 2 questions. Maybe first one is like, can you kind of talk through like how sentiment for like RWAs have been like changing like throughout the past few years? I was previously at Cello, and like we were kind of talking about like RWAs, and then it kind of became stagnant. So what's kind of been the perception about bringing real world assets to the on-chain world, and also how will the DeFi landscape change once you guys do become this TradFi to DeFi interoperability layer and are kind of extending the functionality of oracles to RWAs and the metadata for RWAs?
So I think for Maker, like if you look at the original white paper, we always said that DAI is not just going to be backed by crypto; it's going to be backed by all kinds of stuff, right? Stocks, bonds, commodities, like gold, oil, platinum. That was going to, this diverse basket of collateral, right? If you handled exposure in a responsible way, right, would lead to a better, less riskier stablecoin. We didn't get to this, you know, in a very graceful manner, I would say. There were no real examples of people having done this previously, at least not on the scale that we were planning on doing this, right? Which today is in the multiple billions. Some of those deals never, like we spent 10 months trying to get them together and then nothing happened. We had one really high profile, like we were really excited about working with this French bank called Société Générale, who's like one of the, I think they're like the third or fourth largest bank in France, right? And they had like a innovation team called SocGen Forge, and that had an enormous amount of leeway in doing like really interesting stuff like this, right? So even though that organization from a legal compliance point of view is like really, really stiff, the Forge subsidiary, right, we could like work with us and do cool stuff. And we probably spent like 18 months, and writing the smart contract code was like only 2 of those 18 months, right? It was a lot of like the legal legwork, getting everything to the point where, you know, their lawyers were happy. And then we launched it, and then essentially what this facility was for SocGen had a bunch of mortgage bonds, right? So loans for, you know, houses to French consumers to buy homes that were denominated in euros, and they were going to refinance those bonds, you know, through Maker, right? That was like the premise of this deal, and I think it was going to be like a $50 million deal. And so like we launched it, and then they did the refinancing, and we're like, oh my God, yes. And then they immediately undid it, and we're like, cool, we did it. And like for them, it was just like this like proof of concept that like, yeah, right? Like we did the thing. And then like, yeah, but you undid the thing. Like, no, but we did it. Like, and right, and it seemed like we were just like talking past each other, right? And while I would like to say, oh, but we learned so much from that experience, I can tell you after working on something for 18 months, you just want to smash your face into a wall. Like, so, you know, there's no like, this is the cookie cutter golden formula recipe that you follow and then it just works. You know, I think you can take Maker's lead, and I can tell you that T-bills work quite well. You should start there and then branch out from there. Because there's going to be a lot of like, the prize is not behind this door. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.